Hindi tayo naiiba at sana'y paniwala ang napipiliin kaaraw-araw. At alam ko ang aking kaya, alam ko ang hindi, alam ko ang kailangan upang makapagsilbi. Hanggat may kabutihan, hanggat may pag-ibig, liwanag ang mananaig. At hindi ko may papangako ang kulay rosas.
Hello, Ateneans! To ensure a smooth running webinar for both the speaker and the audience, please be reminded of these following. Number 1. For the entire duration of the webinar, kindly turn off or mute your microphones to avoid interrupting the presenter. Number 2. Be on time. Once you have joined the Zoom session, please refrain from leaving and attend the entire duration of the webinar. Number 3. To raise your queries, you may type them in the chat box of the platform you are using. Kindly refrain from posting comments unrelated to the topic. Number 4. The moderator will be acknowledging your questions and directing them to our speakers during the open forum. Number 5. When participating in the open form. Number 8. Use your real name and follow the prescribed format for proper documentation, if any. Number 9. Unless you are permitted by the organizer, please do not record any part of the webinar. And number 10. Please give us a week to prepare your e-certificate to be sent via email. Thank you and enjoy the webinar.
Hello there, Ateneans! Welcome to the new season of the Alternative Class Program.
That's right, the ACP is back and it comes with something more.
Indeed, the ACP is one of the biggest and most anticipated formation programs in the Ateneo, with more than 80% of the college population participating in the program's semestral offerings.
And the ACP is made possible through the collaboration of the Office of Student Affairs and its partners, like academic departments and formation offices, the Supreme Student Government, and student volunteers like us. Why don't we refresh our students' memories on what the ACP is all about, Seth?
Sure, Alyssa, that would be helpful, especially for those who are attending the ACP for the first time. The ACP is conducted every semester to provide the college students with formative opportunities outside their regular classroom routine and daily schedule in support of the university's uniquely Jesuit educational goals. Instead of attending their classes for a particular period, students choose one ACP topic from among the offered webinars and e-workshops.
That's right, Zach. Carefully selected resource speakers from different fields of specialization are invited to showcase their knowledge, skills, and inspire students to nurture their personal development and partake in social advocacies or causes.
Did you know that there are almost 30 ACP topics in store for all students this sem? And each student could take part in up to 4 webinars and workshops?
Wow, that's amazing, Seth. And what's even more amazing about the ACP is that our topics are varied enough to cater to the different interests of our students. We have politics, environment, arts and crafts, and health.
Foreign languages, financial literacy, performing arts. Name it and you have it in ACP.
But wait, there's more about the ACP this semester. Because of the improvement in our pandemic situation, we are now bringing back some face-to-face ACP events, especially the workshops.
That's indeed a good news for everyone, Alyssa. And I'm sure the students, like us, are excited to learn new things in the company of our fellow students. Speaking of more, what is really the meaning of the more? What is Magis?
That's a good question, Zeth. Students have a lot of misconceptions about Magis, so this is an opportunity to clarify what Magis really means. The Ignatian Magis is choosing the most loving option in our actions and decisions out of our love for God. Without this love for God and love of God, the more is not Magis.
Meaning the more is not about having more or doing more until you get exhausted. It is about quantity or excellence. Contrary to what people understand about Magis, neither is it about settling for the minimum and being complacent after having achieved so.
Magis is love of God and for God. And what better way to do Magis than by serving God's people, especially the poor and marginalized, as a way to love and glorify God. That's Magis. And we, Ateneans, are called to discover and live out the more loving option in our everyday lives.
Given this theme, the ACP topics are carefully chosen to be relevant to the current times, formative, and mission-driven. And at the end of the webinars and e-workshops, the ACP hopes for the following objectives. First, acquire knowledge and/or skills that are relevant to one's interest, talent, skill, passion, or advocacy. Relate and share the learning and insight gained from the topic or activity in conversation or dialogue and personal reflection.
Third, examine the importance of one's interest, talent, skill, passion, or advocacy to the development of the society. And fourth, seek ways or opportunities by which the gained knowledge and skills can be further advanced and used for the benefit of the immediate organization, community, or larger society.
For now, we would like you to listen to the speakers sharing.
And please take part in the conversation during and even after the event.
Strive for more. Be persons of Magis and service. And don't forget to learn and have fun while we experience ACP Ateneans. Hello there, Ateneans! Welcome to the new season of the Alternative Class Program.
That's right, the ACP is back and it comes with something more.
Indeed, the ACP is one of the biggest and most anticipated formation programs in the Ateneo, with more than 80% of the college population participating.
ACP is all about, Seth.
Sure, Alyssa, that would be helpful, especially for those who are attending the ACP for the first time. The ACP is conducted every semester to provide the college students with formative opportunities outside their regular classroom routine and daily schedule in support of the university's uniquely Jesuit educational goals. Instead of attending their classes for a particular period, students choose one ACP topic from among the offered webinars and e-workshops.
That's right, Zeth. Carefully selected resource speakers from different fields of specialization are invited to showcase their knowledge, skills, and inspire students to nurture their personal development and partake in social advocacies or causes.
Did you know that there are almost 30 ACP topics in store for all students this sem? And each student could take part in up to 4 webinars and workshops?
Wow, that's amazing, Seth. And what's even more amazing about the ACP is that our topics are varied enough to cater to the different interests of our students. We have politics, environment, arts and crafts, and health.
Foreign languages, financial literacy, performing arts. Name it and you have it in ACP.
But wait, There's more about the ACP this semester. Because of the improvement in our pandemic situation, we are now bringing back some face-to-face ACP events, especially the workshops.
That's indeed a good news for everyone, Alyssa. And I'm sure the students, like us, are excited to learn new things in the company of our fellow students. Speaking of more, what is really the meaning of the more? What is Magis?
That's a good question, Zeth. Students have a lot of misconceptions about Magis, so this is an opportunity to clarify what Magis really means. The Ignatian Magis is choosing the most loving option in our actions and decisions out of our love for God. Without this love for God and love of God, the more is not Magis.
Meaning the more is not about having more or doing more until you get exhausted. It is about quantity or excellence. Contrary to what people understand about Magis, neither is it about settling for the minimum and being complacent after having achieved so.
Magis is love of God and for God. And what better way to do Magis than by serving God's people, especially the poor and marginalized, as a way to love and glorify God. That's Magis, and we, Ateneans, are called to discover and live out the more loving option in our everyday lives.
Given this theme, the ACP topics are carefully chosen to be relevant to the current times, formative, and mission-driven. And at the end of the webinars and e-workshops, the ACP hopes for the following objectives. First, acquire knowledge and/or skills that are relevant to one's interest, talent, skill, passion, or advocacy. Second, relate or share the learning and insight gained from the topic or activity in conversation or dialogue and personal reflection.
Third, examine the importance of one's interest, talent, skill, passion, or advocacy to the development of the society. And fourth, seek ways or opportunities by which the gained knowledge and skills can be further advanced and used for the benefit of the immediate organization, community, or larger society.
For now, we would like you to listen to the speakers sharing.
And please take part in the conversation during and even after the event.
Strive for more. Be persons of Magis and service. And don't forget to learn and have fun while we experience ACP Ateneans.
Good afternoon, our dear Ateneans. In a nation trifled with an oppressive history, injustices must never be forgotten, especially if the perpetrators of these crimes have neither admitted their faults or repented for their sins. the domineering presence of authoritarian and dictatorial leaders has led the Philippines into an anti-democratic state. The people must always retell their stories and never forget their experiences, for this is the only way to prevent history from repeating itself. But in the same breath, this thought-provoking ACP webinar will be the first to correlate the concept and ethics of forgetting when it comes to handling historical trauma. While it is true that the martial law narratives must always be remembered, this event will open a new perspective on another valid and important way to cope up with the tragedies of the past. In confronting historical adversities, such as the martial law, forgetting is also an equally significant collective action. Hence, this program will propose measures on how forgetting can be a tenable collective and political project for the Filipino people. Isang mapagmalayang hapon sa ating lahat. I am Elisa Frances Salvino, a fourth-year legal management student, and I am honored to welcome you to one of the most intriguing and mind-stimulating events in this semester's alternative class program. I welcome you all to this afternoon's webinar entitled We Should Forget, Forgetting as a Project for Martial Law Memory. Through this event, we hope that our participants will be empowered in opening their eyes to different standpoints as to how they could address the spillover effects of historical atrocities. But before we proceed, I would like to give some key reminders for everyone before we start. First, please mute your microphones to prevent distracting the speaker and your fellow participants. Secondly, we highly encourage you to open your cameras if your internet connection permits you. Lastly, if you have any questions or insights, feel free to send them through the Google Form link, which will be provided by our staff through the Zoom chat box. Kindly refrain from indicating comments that are not related to the topic. Rest assured that we will be acknowledging your questions and directing them to our speakers during the open forum. By the way, we are also live in the ADNOOS's YouTube channel, so let us greet our YouTube streamers with a pleasant afternoon as well. Please do not hesitate to send your messages or questions so we could entertain them later in the open forum. Please take note as well, and this is very, very important, that e-certificates will only be awarded to registered participants who will accomplish the evaluation form. Please do stay until the end of this webinar because we will be providing the link for the evaluation form by then. We hope that you will gain new and useful learnings from this event. With all of that said, let us first have a very quick kumustahan session so that we can assess how our students and participants are feeling at the moment. So I would like to ask everyone, and kakaiba yung tanong natin for this webinar. What is one painful historical event in the country that is hard to forget? Again, what is one painful historical event in the country that is hard to forget? To answer the question, please go to the Mentimeter that is flashed on the screen, or you may click the link that is shared in the Zoom chat box. So again, ano yung painful historical event in the country na hindi nyo makakalimutan? I know that we're talking about martial law, but there are also other events na pwedeng hindi nyo makalimutan. So please state that in the Mentimeter and we'll be waiting for your answers. Please don't worry because answers will remain anonymous. So feel free to send that. So yeah, let's see. While waiting for the answers, while waiting for the tech team to flash the answers, I'd like to share, siguro since kumustahan session siya, I'd like to share siguro one painful historical event na hindi ko makakalimutan, yung recent elections. And I think that's something that we all share. I think we all share na medyo masakit siya, especially for those na nag-root, who rooted na magkaroon ng kulay roses na bukas. Pero again, that's something we're going to talk about historical trauma. We're going to talk about how we will deal with that. So that's something that we will handle in this webinar. So ayan, let's see kung ano yung answers ng ating audience. EDSA Revolution. So I'm seeing EDSA Revolution. That's That's a very painful and also a very revolutionary na event. Plaza Miranda bombing, yes, I agree. The elections, yun nga, sinabi, I also shared that kanina, the recent election, ayun, naglalabas na tayo ng sama ng loob. 2022 elections, yan, I'm seeing a lot of wordings for the recent elections. Martial law is malaki yung sa martial law. Of course, that's a topic. Ayan, napaharami. So I'm seeing here, ang pinakamasakit, pandemic. I agree, the pandemic was also something na masakit. It's not only a local event, it's also a global situation na nangyari. I think the pandemic gave us a lot of lessons on how we will cope up, on how we will handle our day-to-day lives. So seeing na napakarami, I can see a lot of emotions here. I can see a lot of events here. I think that we are all ready, and I think na participative ang ating Ateneans for this webinar. So now that I think we are all ready to proceed to the main part of the program, let us now formally begin this event. And I invite all of you to settle down and put ourselves in the presence of the Lord as we begin with the opening prayer.
In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Dear God, we thank you for today and the fresh chance to know, love, and serve you and your people. We thank you for the gifts of life, talents, and persons that you have divinely placed in our lives. We thank you for Ignatian spirituality and the missions of the Society of Jesus and the Ateneo de Naga University. We thank you for our being Ateneans and the unique education and formation and purpose that comes with our identity and values. We thank you for the generosity of your people, especially our speakers and the people who worked hard to make the alternative class program possible. We thank you for our fellow learners and friends who shall take part in enriching conversations and inspiring actions after the event. As we all journey together in new beginnings, continuations, and transitions, may we draw inspiration from the learning we shall gain from ACP and other formation programs. Open our hearts and minds and refresh our memories so that we may discover what you are calling us to do. In the innumerable details, concerns, and hopes that we have today, with courage and joy, may we strive for the more, the magis. That is to strive to know you more intimately, that I may know you more dearly and follow him more closely. May the many crises in our midst not paralyze us. Instead, may it embolden us. May we truly find you in all things, including our own struggles and afflictions, and may we graciously and humbly receive your merciful and reassuring love. We pray for all these in the name of Jesus Christ, with the intercession of Our Lady of Peña Francia and Saint Ignatius of Loyola. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Thank you for the opening prayer. Once again, a pleasant afternoon to our dear Ateneans. We hope that you are all ready to listen to our very special and thought-provoking webinar. With that, I am given the honor to introduce to you our esteemed speaker for this event. Our resource speaker holds a PhD in philosophy from De La Salle University, Manila, and an MA in philosophy from Ateneo de Manila University. At present, he is a faculty of the philosophy department of Ateneo de Naga University, where he teaches philosophy of religion, hermeneutics, and advanced metaphysics. He has published researches on postmodernism, hermeneutics, philosophy of culture, and ethics. He has also published creative works such as poetry and essays in several journals. Ladies and gentlemen, and everyone in between, I am pleased to introduce Dr. Adrian Remodo. Let us all give him a virtual round of applause by clicking the clapping emoji in the chat box. Good afternoon, sir.
Hello.
Good afternoon,
Hi,
sir.
can you hear me?
Yes, sir, you are very much audible.
Okay, thank you. And excuse the lighting. We have my lighting is not so good. I'm here in the library. Thank you, library, for accommodating me this afternoon. Okay, and also again, thank you to the Office of the Student Affairs. I guess I'm one of what the in-house speakers now. Okay, na? Okay, so we begin. So the year 2022 marks the 50th anniversary of President Ferdinand Marcos Sr.'s Proclamation 1081 that placed the entire Philippines under the martial law. According to Marcos Sr., at the time, the political turmoil, for example, the rise of insurgency, violent demonstrations, and other opposition movements, necessitated the declaration. Together with the rationale to quell the movements that destabilize the state, Marcos Sr. also sought to use the constitutionally mandated special powers to revolutionize the Philippine economy to attain prosperity and peace.
Recording in
The road to
progress.
hell,
This meeting is being recorded.
but the road to hell is paved with good intentions. The years that followed proved to be a history filled with the state-sanctioned abuses and corruption, and the multifarious human rights violations. The martial law period in the country's history in the end was punctured by dismal state of economics, politics, and human rights. 50 years hence, talks about moving on from that horrible period in the Philippine history surfaced. The candidacy in the eventual election of Ferdinand Marcos Jr. Was premised on the call for unity. Although the ground and content of such platform was unclear, people seemed to understand it generally as an invitation to move forward from the martial law narratives. Now the martial narratives are presented by the propagandists as divisive. But what indeed is moving on? From what and to where do we go? Marcos Jr. is unequivocal in his stand that he needs not to apologize for the atrocities that his father's regime offered. His supporters are with him on this, arguing that the sins of the father are not the sins of the child or of the son. Another challenge that the martial law narratives face is historical distortion. If we situate it in the so-called post-truth era, the blurring of the lines between fake news, fiction, and established truths, what is happening to martial law narratives and memories is not unique. It is part of a global epistemic crisis where, contrary to the common understanding that it is still about distortion of truth, its advanced stage is more pervasive. We have arrived at a time when facts are no longer twisted, reinterpreted, or conveniently omitted. They are made up and presented ad hoc simply because they fit a particular story or a broader agenda. With this context, martial law memories are being attacked in all fronts as unreliable, a yellow propaganda, or simply false. Induced by troll farms infested social media, truth about Marcos Sr. led Philippines is effectively undermined, if not yet obliterated. Given these situations, social memory is unquestionably paramount in ensuring that this particular period of the Philippine history survives in the present and will be passed on to the next generations. Memory in general faces two challenges. The first is natural. The passage of time naturally affects what we remember and how we remember. The biological understanding of memory attests there are countless events in our life that we naturally forget in time. The second is the socio-political challenge. In this stage, memory is connected with power relations. What we remember and how we remember could be affected by institutions of power, such as the state. Power can command what we should remember as well as what we should forget. Against these two challenges, social memory must it has to ensure that the contents are true and that it will tell those contents no matter who is in power. Thus, remembering is a responsibility in these two senses. Stating that remembering is imperative, that forget constitutes the other pole in collective memory. In other words, I would argue that we need to forget as we need to remember. Nevertheless, to be able to pursue such claim, there is a need to clarify the concepts of collective memory and social trauma. The dialectics of or this presentation are dedicated for that purpose. The last section shall propose few means on how forgetting and perhaps even forgiveness can be politically tenable. So the first part. So collective memory is a tricky concept. It is highly intertwined with another debatable socio-political category, which is collective identity. The question is, when does a collectivity come into being, right? What is so collective in a collective? The famous book work by Benedict Anderson argues that such category is an imagined category. There is an spiritualized image presented among individuals, like, for example, the concept of the nation, which in turn becomes a rallying point of a collective. Hence, communities are to be distinguished not by their falsity or genuineness, but by the style by which they are imagined, according to Anderson. To fortify this imagination, narratives play an essential role as they are the reservoir of memorial traces onto which such collective imagination is grounded. Individuals within such collectivity imagine and appropriate the memorial contents as truly their own. Hence, both memory and identity become collective. Hallbox analogizes this relationship to an echo. According to her, the collective memory endures and draws strength from its base in a coherent body of people. It is individuals as group members who remembers. However, such imagination ceases to be a simple concept when we come to realize that nothing happens in a vacuum. Power is ubiquitous and is not. Next slide. Okay. Power is ubiquitous and imagination is not an exception. Next slide. There. Thank you. So, for example, national imagination tends to impose its narrative even to those who do not associate themselves in the collective identity that it espouses. In this perspective, nations are not only products of colonization, they can only continue to exist as tools to perpetuate colonization. Foucault argues that the truth we inherit from social memories cannot be divorced from the institutions mostly sanctioned by the central state that produced them. In the process, the official account becomes the dominant memory and consequently displaces and mutes other narratives, especially those who are powerless. In this case, okay, let's go back to this previous slide. So in this case, dominant memory is produced in the course of these struggles and is always open to contestations. We also want to insist, however, that there are real processes of domination in the historical field. So Foucault is basically saying that, history cannot be divorced from who is in power. Okay, history has signature, and the one who signs history is powerful. So there are dominant voices in history that make up the canon. And in the end, those who are powerless, the voiceless, do not make it to the history. This kind of production of memory makes collective memory as problematic in the sense that it renders historical truths and contents a mechanism that serves the dominant class. What happens to the subjugated, the colonized, the oppressed? They are muted and made to be the means towards the creation of the collective identity. One can therefore ask, whose interest is served in producing this kind of memory? Okay? The coupling of memory and power bestows upon the notion of collectivity the character of foundational violence. By passing through the seeds of the state, it becomes one of the apparatuses of power. If we follow Weber's notion that the state has the monopoly of legitimate violence, the dispensation of what to remember and what to forget follows the distributive logic of the state. So, in short, the argument is that the contents of our memory is commanded by, by those who are in power. Okay? Yet, another approach to the production of collective memory is through the sociological fact that members of a given community exchange experiences, narratives, myths, and the like with each other. These intersubjective exchanges produce the common memory that, in turn, are passed on to generations. Halbach affirms that while memory is individualizing, nevertheless, it is in society that people normally acquire their memories. It is also in society that they recall, recognize, and localize their memories. In this account, collective memory is sourced from the common lived experiences of the members of a society. It follows that the production of cultural symbols, language, myths, and the like are rooted in these exchanges. Hence, culture here is regarded as an intersubjective or even as objective and as embodied in symbolisms and patterns of meaning. Rejecting the association of political culture with collective political psychology, new political culture theory highlights the discursive dimensions of politics, seeing political language, symbolism, and claim making as constitutive of interests and identities. Therefore, contrary to the first model of formation of collective memory as purely mechanism of power, the intersubjective approach to collective memory offers a more sociological and even existential account of its origins. As a result, collective identity is also intersubjectively produced. By remembering, members imagine themselves as belonging to a collective experience. It is not just that we remember as members of a group, but that we constitute those groups and their members simultaneously in the act, thus remembering. So when we talk about the word remembering, so there's this the more because through remembering we. Okay, so finally, the intersubjective approach to the genesis of collective memory and identity can go beyond the dictates of the state. The exchanges of the group's memories need no validation from a central power and, in fact, can offer an antithesis to the so called official memory. If memory is constitutive of identity, and if cultural memories can go beyond the official recognition of the state, the identities follow the same logic. A collectivity may be officially recognized by power, like, for example, the notion of nationality, but may have sources of their identity outside of the nationality. Okay? For Ricoeur, the French philosopher Paul Ricoeur, uh, it is at this point that narrativity comprises the ethico-mythical nucleus found at the core of every identity discourse. which functions according to the following. First, you have the narration of founding events because most cultures have some original happening or act which gives some basis of unity to the diversity within the culture. Second, I would say that one of the resources of the theory of narrativity is that now we may tell different stories about ourselves. So we have to learn how to vary the stories that we are telling about ourselves. Third, we are caught in the stories of others, and we have to assume for ourselves that stories of the others will tell about us, which have their founding events, their own strategies, their own plans. So the more we exchange stories, the more we exchange stories with each other, the more we remember, the more we exchange memories with each other, uh, the more we build this collective identity and collective memory as well. Okay, so hopefully I have answered already our first question, that how does collectivity come into being? What is so collective about uh, the term collectivity? So the recourse on how collective memory and identity are formed and sustained is necessary in elucidating the notion of collective trauma, which will be my characterization of martial law narrative. The question again that confronts us is this. I think I have a slide here. Okay, there. How does trauma become collective when not all of the members of a nation suffered from that given atrocity? Right? Why are we by default members of this or sharers in this collective trauma when most of us here perhaps have no longer experienced firsthand the atrocities of martial law? Why? What makes us a part of the collective trauma? In the case of martial law, we have to accept that there is no one grand narrative on it. The position of the agent matters to how one narrates an experience. It is therefore no surprise that there are those who will claim that the martial law years were peaceful years. For some, it was the golden age of the Philippine infrastructure and arts. For some, that was a period of gruesome state-sanctioned abuses and crimes. And for some, they do not have an account of it. At a glance, a collectivist account of martial law trauma is already challenged. Now, psychologically and medically speaking, trauma is experienced individually. The American Psychological Association defines it as an emotional response to a terrible event. Furthermore, by definition, the mental health consequences of trauma are linked to an external event, okay? Trauma, which is necessary cause of at least one psychiatric disorder, PTSD. Definitions emphasize the impact of an external event to one's mental conditions and the responses that traumatized persons give. As we can see, there is a close connection between memory and trauma. The first is that both are, strictly speaking, okay, happening on the individual level. Some may relate to the other. His, her experience, traumatic experience, but such will always remain to be his or hers alone. Furthermore, memory is essential in understanding of trauma because the terrible event is etched in the subject's memory. Okay, so psychological and neuroscientific researches show how the brain and its mnemonic function reacts to trauma. Okay? In addition, memory is how traumatized subjects reacts, interprets, and relates to their world. Traumatic memories become uh, either become intrusive to the subject's mental life, or they become the reasons why the subject suffers memory loss. Okay? According to the psychologists, according to the medical field, uh, those who experience trauma in the end suffer also an amnesia, some temporarily, some permanently. Okay, traumatized memory have difficulties identifying a new event by always associating it with the past experience, right? Like for example, um, na-trauma ka dun sa ex mo, right? So lahat ng incheck, lahat ng chinito na makikita mo, you won't give, you won't trust anymore because it reminds you of that ex that traumatized you. Okay, so how do we move from this individualist and medical understanding of trauma to its collectivist and cultural signification? I would like to argue that the intersubjective approach to collective trauma is instructive in this issue. The exchanges that happen in constructing collective memory are also the reason why collective trauma becomes possible. Speaking about Vietnam War and its cultural political significance to Vietnam's memory and trauma, Oleg, a sociologist, argues that the fact that the memory of such personally traumatic experiences is externalized and objectified as narrative means it is no longer a purely individual or psychological matter. So we share in the collectivity of martial law memories because we have narratives. It is the mental memory is externalized, objectified through the narratives that we give concerning that period in our Philippine history. Okay, so Alexander thus explains cultural and collective trauma in the following. Cultural trauma occurs when members of a collectivity feel that they have been subjected to a horrendous event that leave indelible marks upon their group consciousness, marking their memories forever and changing their future identity in fundamental and irrevocable ways. Narratives are central in the formation of collective trauma. Under this model, current generations who may not have a first-hand account of forms of terrible experience are initiated into the memorial contents of those who lived to experience them and narrate them. Anderson's theory of imagined communities can be given a new signification in this sense. Collective trauma is shared imagination of violence by a given group. Ehrman gives another powerful account of collective cultural trauma. He says a cultural trauma emerges with the recognition, symbolic elaboration, and meaningful representation of social wounds that are felt to remain open. It continues to exist as a cultural process that tends, as it were, to turn wounds into scars, something healed but still present as meaningful reference. Symbolic closure is vital at this point. The lack thereof keeps the wound open and fosters anxiety derived from the deprivation of coherence in the narrative marked by tragic occurrence. Given these iterations of collective trauma, we can now see better why martial law memories continue to be part of our identity and discourse. Although, as I was saying earlier, many of us are no longer the first-hand narrators. I want to argue further that this collective trauma is not even limited to nationalist discourse in the sense that, as mentioned earlier, state-sanctioned identity, otherwise known as nationality, does not necessarily invite collective sentiment, save perhaps for the benefits of access to state services. Marginal narratives are collective trauma in the sense that they appeal to our being members of our local communities and of humanity in general. The construction of nationalist discourse out of the martial narratives comes only secondary to such claim. Okay, hi. Okay, so now let's go to the third part, which is now on forgetting. Okay, so needless to say, the notion of collectivity in its three iterations, memory, identity, trauma, rests on the conscious effort to remember. The term remembering connotes the idea that by striving to keep the narratives alive, members remember belonging to their collective. The imagined community gains its reality in the acts of remembering. Against the tyranny of time that swallows the present into pastness and its possible oblivion, remembering it insists continued existence. With regard to martial law memories, there is no question that we need to remember the narratives of those years. What I have said earlier, that while I have said earlier that there is no one grand narrative of martial law, it cannot be denied that the atrocity happened. The Philippine economy plummeted. Human rights were denied. Historiography, okay, the science or the art of writing history, comes as a method of keeping these narratives alive. Okay? There is a duty to remember. According to Paul Ricoeur, there is a duty to remember because there is a duty to tell. Okay? The duty to remember consists not only in having a deep concern for the past, but in transmitting the meaning of past events to the next generations. So there is no question that we need to tell, we need to remember, we need to narrate. In Adrian's characterization of cultural trauma, okay, mentioned earlier, he mentions one defining aspect of, and that is social wounds that are felt to remain open. These wounds are represented in symbols, narratives that call for recognition. This is nothing short of the psychological and medical iterations of a trauma. Clinical studies affirm that, for example, PTSD manifests like open wounds. The patients experience disturbing thoughts and feelings related to their experience that last long after the traumatic event happened. They may relive the event through the flashbacks or nightmares. They may feel sadness, fear, anger, and they may feel detached or estranged from other people. That's according to the American Psychiatric Organization. Okay? The act of, for in this case, the act of remembering proves to be a punishing to those who experience trauma. Traumas as wounds need to be treated. In psychoanalysis, trauma manifests in several ways. Freud has classically argued that in traumatized memory, there is a compulsion to repeat such terrible events, which is not necessarily an act of remembering. What is more significant in Freud's argument is that, contrary to the patient's belief that repeating those events give him or her pain, what happens in reality is that it becomes the pleasure principle of the patient. Okay? Remembering those traumatic memories, uh, Freud argues in the traumatized, remembering those pains becomes the pleasure principles. So we think that we are in pain, but in the end, it becomes a source of comfort. Okay, it becomes pleasurable in the end. What this means is that a traumatized agent may intentionally keep the wounds open because repeating them gives a subconscious pleasure. Okay? Uh, Following this psychoanalytic explanation, Ricoeur talks, again, I use Paul Ricoeur here. Ricoeur talks about the abuses of memory, which happens on three levels: the pathological therapeutic level, the pragmatic level, and the ethical political level. However, for this lecture, for this webinar, I will only focus on the first level. So in the pathological therapeutic level, Ricoeur employs the Freudian psychoanalytic terms mourning and melancholia, which refers to our effort of remembering and forgetting. As a means, hi, shout out to someone who is whose microphone is open. Okay, okay. So as a means to access to the past, memory is reconstructive. That is, Uh, yeah, sorry, can we go to the next slide, please? Okay, so memory is reconstructive. That is, meaning to say, it presents what is already gone as if it were happening in the present. Okay, so for example, the historical accounts of colonization is reliving in the present of what happened in the past, hence making historians the insolvent debtors of that past. Nevertheless, reliving the past can be pathological in the sense that the one who remembers can forget the pastness of the past in favor of the present. Melancholic remembering is a despair and a longing to be reconciled with the loved object, which is lost without the hope of reconciliation. Di ba? If we are feeling melancholic, like for example, bago ka palang mag-break up, you become melancholic because you still want to retrieve the lost time. Okay, so you long for those lost times, and you continue listening to music as if because those music and the songs that you are listening to bring back the memories, and so uh, the lost beloved is somehow brought back to your memory. Brought back to the present. I mean, so in melancholic remembering, it narrates the past as a continuing present, hence mistaking the trace for the real presence. In the psychoanalytic sense, one continues to recount the scars as wounds. The patient thinks that he or she is remembering the past, but in the strictest sense, he is just repeating the event as if they are still in the present. In the historical sense, to reconstruct the past, melancholic remembering is to relieve the traces to accuse the present. The therapy of mourning counters the pathology of melancholia. Okay, so the past, in the context of mourning, so from melancholia, we move to the work of mourning. Okay, the past is narrated in the present within the proper frame of being a trace. Okay, as already mentioned in the preceding paragraphs or in the preceding discussions, in this context, the consciousness is already reconciled with the pastness of the past, together with its lost love objects or values. The time of mourning is the time of remembering that irrecoverable yet narratable past. So those who are through the work of mourning, memory becomes what? Memory comes comes to a point that it accepts the lost objects as lost objects. Okay, lost values, lost beloved. Okay, that it happened. Wala na talaga. Okay, and I may talk about it, I may narrate about it, but the point is that the time is gone and it is irrecoverable. Okay, so hence, in this sense, this is kind of in the work of mourning. There is a sense of forgetting that is happening. In what way? Forgetting is not the erasure of traces, but the remembrance of the past as traces. In the work of mourning, the ego recovers itself. It recounts not to accuse the present, but to converse, to talk with it. Hence, after the work of mourning, joy can also crown with its grace the work of memory. On the horizon of his work, a happy memory when the poetic image completes the work of mourning. So the possibility of a happy memory or a reconciled or healed memory only happens if we transition from melancholia to mourning. In this context, we now ask, how do we remember martial law atrocities? It is no longer a question of whether we should remember. As I have said, there's no questioning. We should remember martial law. The more pressing question now is, how should we remember? A pathological remembering of this period in our history takes form in the compulsive repetition of those narratives without an eye to closure. There is an imagined temporal continuity from 50 years ago to the present in the aspects of pain and suffering. So, Oleg and Simcoe argue that in the same argue in the same way in the following. Okay. So, according to Oleg and Simcoe, the emphasis on trauma's chronicity, which was originally intended to secure recognition and sympathy for psychological suffering, may also perpetuate that suffering may also perpetuate that suffering by projecting it far into the future, keeping victims caught in a cyclical temporality marked by overwhelming pain. So, in a melancholic remembering, keeping the pain is essential. Okay, so just like uh, in remembering some historical account, in a melancholic remembering, in a the traumatized memory keeps the pain and transfers it to the next generation. So to continuously remember martial law in this way could be a possible case of melancholic remembering. I do not mean to claim in any manner that those atrocious years were not painful. However, just as our discussion of traumas as open wounds, relieving the pain as if we are still at that very moment is a pathology of memory. I therefore argue that as a collective, we have to start the process, if we have not yet done it, we have to start the process of mourning. We have to mourn over the loss, tragedy, and horrors that martial law has given in our collective memory. Not just mourning accepts a recoverable past. Mourning has an eye towards eventual healing and closure. Hence, I offer three arguments on why we should forget. I would like to hinge my first argument on why we should forget martial law in this context. We have to forget martial law. Like any trauma and wounds, we have to heal as a collective. No wound is maintained for its own sake. Wounds are treated for healing. To forget is not to erase the fact of the wound. To forget is to keep the trace, the scar of the fact of the wound. In this case, forgetting is not an enemy of remembering. Forgetting remembers the trace and accepts it as trace. To perpetuate the pain, although we invite sympathy, could be counterproductive in the life of the collective, as it also serves to exacerbate the suffering by projecting the pain of the past into the future unaltered. So Ricoeur also emphasizes that forgetting to be what it is, traces must persist. We have to save the traces. False traces hamper forgetting. Trauma patients need to know the truth of what happened, which memory may repress as a coping and defense mechanism. Getting access to the truth behind those memories and developing coping mechanism to face it counters repression. In a parallel manner, forgetting in the context of a collective trauma needs the truthful accounting of memory. Yeah. Next slide, please. Effacing, effacing truth suppresses the process of forgetting, and hence pathological memory continues. Forgetting needs truths, not their denial or distortion. Okay? In her essay on Cambodian genocide, Thompson evaluates the role of art in the Cambodian collective. He calls it forgetting to remember. So that's my first argument. My second argument on why we should forget is still hinged on the pathology of memory. Psychoanalysts agree that one symptom of PTSD is dissociation, where agents suffer depersonalization, derealization, and compartmentalization, among others. The agent, under this dissociative memory, the agents cannot see the continuity of her action and her identity. Dissociated memory cannot say, it is I who made it. The disease of memory as a disease of identity brings us to the notion of dissociated collectivity. Dissociation raptures collective imagination. Ideen argues that trauma disorganizes the group's psychic economy because the beliefs, values, expectations, and ideals that are part of its cultural identity are radically shaken, challenged, and disrupted. Hence, we need to forget because we need to continue constructing our collective imagination. Cliche as it may sound, but the political significance of constructing our collective identity remains true. One sociologist, I did, follows Nietzsche's notion of active forgetting in this sense. He says, active forgetfulness is an active ability to suppress negative and traumatic memories, which is necessary condition for a culture to uphold and develop itself further. It is a kind of defense mechanism that blocks harmful thoughts, enables a positive spirit, and makes place for the new. In Ricoeur's model of narrative identity, he speaks of telling otherwise as the capacity to construct new plots about how we can imagine our identity. Admittedly, traumatized memories are disempowered to imagine otherwise. Hence, it needs healing. To tell otherwise is not to eliminate the vestiges of the terrible past. On the contrary, it is to collect these memories in order to create a new plot for the collective's future. Forgetting dreams, forgetting dreams of a better future built from the ruins of the narratives of trauma. Ricoeur says, to embrace the future, one must forget the past in a gesture of inauguration, beginning, and re-beginning as in rituals of initiations. Hence, my second argument, we should forget because we need to inaugurate a new narrative for our collective life. My third and final argument on why we should forget follows from the second argument. We need to forget because we have to retrieve the original meaning of ethical life as the wish for life. The good is the initial idea that serves any aim. As Aristotle puts it, you have learned this in your ethics class. The good is the end of any action. In this sense, the good life is that in the view of which all our actions are directed. Flourishing is only possible when we do not lose sight of that wish for a good life. Several studies identify how victims of trauma have poorer to skeptic attitude towards a better quality of life. Okay, so those who suffered trauma, according to research, they believe that there is no better future ahead of them. This is an ontological effect of violence. It deprives the possibility for a good life. I would like to argue that we need to forget because we need to continue pursuing the wish for a good life, whether in the personal, intersubjective, and political dimensions. The good life drives us to insist in existing. Collective trauma can indeed be bigger than life experience. Martial law trauma needs to be confronted because we want to continue wishing for a good life as a collective named Filipinos. Okay, finally, my concluding part. On the day of the 50th, on the day of the 50th martial law anniversary, Senator Amy Marcos has this to say in a vlog. Sabi niya, hindi mo ikamamatay ang pag-move on. Hindi mo ikamamatay ang pagsuko. Ang pag-move on o ang pagpapalaya. Hindi rin madali ang makalimot. Pero sabi niya, mas mabilis gumaling ang sugat kapag hindi kinakalikot. I have to categorically say that statements like this do not help in the process of forgetting. Amy Marcos' words are nothing but expressions of callous conscience. Contrary to the aims of forgetting laid down in this presentation, words like those of Amy Marcos amplify the trauma and hence blocks the possibility of forgetting and the eventual healing of memory. The primary mistake of Amy Marcos is this. Moving on is the initiative of the victims and never the call of the perpetrators of trauma. No perpetrator has the right to call and demand for the victims forgetting and forgiveness. Ricker defines initiative as an intervention of the agent of action in the course of the world, an intervention which effectively causes changes in the world. When one initiates, he or she inaugurates a new opening and a possibility in his or her world. Sorry. I want to understand forgetting as an initiative that concerns our memory. The disenfranchised memory initiates new present. To initiate something is to inaugurate new course of things. In short, to make not just an incident, but the beginning of a continuation. In many cases, the initial event bears the weight of how the future will become. Thus, cultural memory needs to be ushered into the future by the initiative to forget. However, forgetting needs needs not to be a sole personal initiative. We need systems to hasten the initiative to forget. So I propose three socio-political actions for this purpose, what I call the political initiative to forget. Of course, these three purposes are not in any way the exhaustive list. They are, in fact, debatable. Okay, so here are my proposals on how we can start the process or the initiative to forget. One, establish the truth commission on martial law narration. Forgetting needs to keep the traces of trauma. In a time when historical distortions abound, a truth commission that officializes the martial law accounts is imperative. It will guard the memory from efforts to distort, downplay, or even efface the truth about martial law. Truth commissions are established in other parts of the world that experience a collective trauma, such as Rwanda, Germany, Guatemala, Canada. In fact, we all, the Philippines actually also had the Truth Commission, yung sa transitional justice when we were doing uh, uh, the Bangsamoro region, okay, when we were drafting the concept, the laws of the Bangsamoro, okay. While critics rightly pointed out the limitations and failures of truth commissions, they nevertheless acknowledge the purpose of confronting, recording, and making official. And because it is official, everyone must accept the facts about the terror that happened. As melancholia is countered by mourning, we have to take account of those irrecoverable losses. Instituting Truth Commission on Martial Law in the time of President Marcos Jr. attains a new meaning. It is not only a political book, it becomes symbolical too. This will be a litmus test for his campaign platform, which is unity. If martial law narrative is deemed to be divisive, then let the state recognize the truth about those atrocities. Trauma needs recognition, especially by those who caused it. If Marcos Jr. is sincere about unity, then let that be grounded on truth. Unity without truth is nothing but a propaganda, a sloganism meant to entice unsuspecting consciousness. The second is justice. Okay? So before justice is understood as giving what is due to others, at its core is the notion of recognition. Losses that we have suffered during the martial law, but also the intangible losses. Our history, our life as a nation at the time. Okay? And up to now, okay, up to now, the state still has to give the due to the first-hand victims of the martial law. The third is apology. Let Marcos apologize. The election of Marcos Jr. to presidency is a good time for him to reconsider his position not to give apology on behalf of his father. Marcos Jr. is no longer just his father's son. He is now the face of the state. In both instances, giving an apology and requesting for forgiveness are both political and symbolical necessities if we want to heal. As states themselves are dispensers of institutionalized violence, confronting their actions in the past enables them to impute responsibility for their actions. The acknowledgement of guilt brings in the past, the acknowledgement of guilt brings into the open the wounds of the past that may have been silenced for a long time. Public utterances of political guilt are answers to the evils created by the state to which he or she belongs. While it may be a representative in essence, okay, as Marcos Jr. would say, I am not my father. Of course, the apology would now just be a representative act, as the original perpetrators and victims may not even be alive anymore. Such gestures are symbolic of history of the trauma that connects the past and the present. In conclusion, forgetting may not be the mood of the current time yet. Nevertheless, following the three arguments I have, the initiative to forget. It is a project to begin somewhere. The state must enable forgetting by institutional recognition of this terrible past of our country's history. Let it be reiterated that forgetting is never the call of the perpetrators. No Marcos has the right to invoke it. It is the victim's initiative to undergo the process. Finally, we have to remember that forgetting is never being silent about the evils that have been committed. It is to keep the traces of evil so that they may not happen again. Forgetting is not an enemy of remembering. We should forget, and it should never happen again. Thank you very much for listening to this somehow long lecture.
Wow. Thank you so much, Sir Adrian, for that very brilliant and eye-opening discussion. For our audience, let us please show our appreciation by sending Sir Adrian our love. Please type heart emojis in the chat box to show our appreciation for his wonderful, very, very wonderful discussion. I would also like to greet our viewers on YouTube. We currently have around 500 plus viewers, both on YouTube and Zoom combined.
Oh.
It is evident that a lot of students want to learn from Sir Adrian. As a student, I learned a lot from the discussion. As we move into a post-truth society, we need to forget as we need to remember. It is no longer a question of should we remember. Instead, it is asking how exactly should we remember. Indeed, we need to remember the martial law narratives because there is a responsibility to tell. However, we should also consider that the act of remembering proves to be a punishment to those who experienced firsthand trauma. In continuously remembering those traumatic experiences, it may become pleasurable and recurrent. Hence, it may lead to social wounds that are being left wide open. In forgetting, we have to start the process of moving past melancholic remembering into mourning. Because it is in mourning that we have eventual healing and closure. We need to forget because we need to keep reconstructing our collective imagination. Wow, I personally learned a lot. And if you have questions or comments for our speaker, please save them for the open forum later because please send them in the open forum later. However, you may already accomplish the Google form that will be shared in the chat box below. But before we transition to the open forum and for our audience to absorb everything that happened in the discussion, let us first take part in a quick game segment that our staff prepared for us. We'll be having a small icebreaker to fully energize our participants so that they are ready to give their questions later. So if you are ready, please type in the chat box ready for our participants. Please type ready if you want to play some games. Syempre, pag may games, may prize. So ayan, I see that our audience, yes, ready na sila. So let's ask the tech team to please show the slides. Ayan. There. So our game will be Guess the Gibberish Martial Law Edition. I believe a lot of people are familiar with this game, but let me still read the mechanics. So here are our game mechanics. Number 1, gibberish words or phrases will be flashed on the screen. Number 2, participants must guess the correct words or phrases by commenting on their answers in the chat box. Third, the first participant to send the correct answer after my signal and the go line in the chat box will win. So again, before you answer, please wait for my go signal and the go line in the chat box. Fourth, the winner will receive a Gcash prize. So I hope that everyone is ready because you will receive a cash prize for our winners. And yung winners natin, if mapalad na manalo, please message Miss Christine Josan Escote, our staff, via Zoom direct message so that you can claim your prize. So I can see that a lot of our audience are now ready. So let's have a trial round first. Trial round muna, pampa warm up. So yeah, let's proceed with the trial round. So ready na kayo ng keyboard warrior skills? So yeah, staff, tech team for our trial round. Yan. War root of habeas corpus. Okay, I don't know kung ano yan. If you know what the word is, please type it in the chat box in 3, 2, 1, go. Ayon. I'm already seeing answers. And we already have a winner according to our tech team. So tech team, please reveal the answer. Writ of habeas corpus. That is the correct answer. So if you won, I think i-chat ng staff natin kung sino yung nanalo. So our staff will be putting your names in the chat box if you're the ones who, ay, joke lang, trial pa pala. Trial pa lang pala, excited ako. So trial pa lang yon. So that's how you play the game. Paunahan to. So yan, ready na? Ready? Scam pala yung host. So sorry, trial pa lang yon, trial. So ayan, excited kasi ako. Ito, real deal na. It's real, ito na, totoohan na to, legit na to. Walang halong scam na. Let's now proceed to round 1. Again, please wait for my go signal, ha? So yan, round 1, next slide. Ayun, the Fonso Monastery, Jane Pangko, hindi ko alam. I don't know what that is. If you know the answer, ayan, duelo na. In 3, 2, 1, go. Ayun. Ayun, so I think meron nang nakakuha, if I'm not mistaken. Yes, meron na talagang nakakuha according to our tech team. So ita-type yung name kung sino man yung winner, and if ever you are the winner, ayan, nag-reveal na Defensor Minister Juan Ponce Enrile. So that is our correct answer. So yan. Let us now proceed to the next slide. Round 2 na to. So, Extensica Homun writes, para siyang Harry Potter spell. Okay, so yan. In 3, 2, 1, go! Medyo mahirap to. So yan, naghihintay tayo ng answer. Extensica Homun writes. Wala pang answer at the moment. There's still no answer. So yan, isip pa tayo. Okay. Ayan, so I'm already seeing answers. Confirming. Answer reveal nga tayo, tech team. Extensive human rights violation. So that is the correct answer. So congratulations to our winners. We only have 2 winners for this game. So congratulations sa ating winners. Our staff will be writing sa chat box kung sino yung nanalo. And if ever you won, please don't forget to directly message our staff, Miss Christine Josan, so that you will claim your prize. Ayan. So thank you very much to our Ateneans for participating in our mini game. Now that our game is finished, I can feel the enthusiasm of our Ateneans in this event. I think that they are already ready for the open forum. So you can post your comments and inquiries for our resource speaker in the Zoom chat box or in the live comment section for our YouTube viewers. For our Zoom participants, you may also use the raise hand button at the bottom of your screens. However, please wait for me to acknowledge you before you open your microphone. While waiting for our participants to share their insights and questions, let us welcome our invited reactors for this event. First, we have Mr. Jerwin Roy Villacruz, a 4th-year BSPA Legal Management student, to give the first reaction for this webinar.
Hello, everyone. Am I visible and audible?
Yes, you are.
All right. So first of all, I'd like to thank the very insightful talk of Dr. Adrian Remodo. In fact, it is very academic and technical. And on my end, it feels like sitting in a graduate school lecture. And we're very grateful for this alternative class program because it allowed college students and even other students to be able to have an experience of what it feels like to have a graduate school type of discussion. Now, on my end as a reactor, I think there's such a very unique take because for multiple times in the historical discussion of the martial law, there's always that general banner of never forget. The idea that we shouldn't be forgetting about the past so that we will have a structure in the future so that we would be able to remember them, and therefore that is a scaffolding in the future for us to be able to do whatever is the most appropriate action insofar as the things that happened in the past. For example, remembering about the atrocities of the martial law allows us to be able to be very vigilant about what is happening now insofar as, for example, the imposition of martial law in Mindanao, the imposition of or the presence of a majority of those who are in the administration in the same way in the Congress, for example. So probably perhaps this reaction will be in a form of looking into the thoughts of an average reasonable person, and perhaps Dr. Adrian shall be discussing them in one go. So a while ago, it started with the idea about history is being won by the victors, and the victors in the status quo are the Marcoses, because they are part of the majority. In fact, 50% plus of the population, assuming that is actually the true data through the popular election, shows that they are the victors in the status quo. And in fact, they have continued their narrative through the mere fact that the Bongbong Marcos is already placed as the president of the Republic of the Philippines, and with their current efforts towards historical distortion through TikTok, through Facebook, etc. Now, in this discussion, there's this idea about trauma, that the way of we are revisiting history in the status quo turns wounds into scars, that there is no symbolic closure in the status quo, and that the act of remembering, in fact, punishes those who experience what happened in the past. It punishes those who actually suffered torture and torture, etc., trigger warning, torture, etc., in the martial law era. So to reconstruct the past is to relive everything in the present, and this was something that is labeled as problematic in the discussion. And therefore, it was emphasized a while ago that there is a duty to remember. But on the end of an average reasonable person, if we take a look at it, the purpose of the Marcoses to forget, to instill to the people why we should be able to forget what happened in the past, is to erase the history as a whole. Because that is their premise, to be able to remain in power, to erase the narratives about